I've always loved cooking since I was a child, and the whole China thing was really an accident. After graduating from university where I studied English literature, I got interested in China through a journalistic job that I had. And I went there on holiday and I loved it. And then I started learning Mandarin in evening classes. And basically one thing led to another, and I managed to get a scholarship to study in China. And I chose Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan province, partly because I'd had a really good lunch there the previous year, and partly just because it had an amazing reputation for food, and I thought it would be a very interesting place to live. And so I went there to study something quite unrelated, but gradually got more and more distracted by the delicious and extraordinary food that was all around me. And so I started sort of learning to cook informally in the kitchens of restaurants around the university and through friends. And then after the university course finished, I was invited to enroll as a regular student at the Sichuan Institute of Higher Cuisine, this famous provincial cooking school. And so I went there, and I was in a class of 50 mostly young Sichuanese men and only 2 other women. And it was all in Sichuan dialect and so on. But it was the most fun. I mean, it was just a wonderful experience. And so that's really where it all started. I suppose being one of just a couple of women in the cooking school, in general, there aren't very many women chefs in China. Where they are in kitchens, they'll normally be doing cold dishes or pastry making, and not so much wok cookery. So I suppose it was quite funny being outnumbered, but I think for my classmates, what was more extraordinary than the fact that I was a woman was that I was a foreigner, because there hadn't been any foreign students in the school before, and also that I was a university graduate, because normally university graduates don't want to be chefs in China. So it was quite a steep learning curve. Most of my classmates had never met a foreigner before at all, and some of them were a bit shy about talking to me, and they just called me Lao Wai, which means foreigner. And so it took a while to sort of, get my place in the class. And of course it was all not only in Chinese, but in Sichuan dialect, and all the textbooks were in Chinese characters, and with the very particular and specialised vocabulary of the Chinese kitchen. So, it was really sort of in at the deep end. But on the other hand, the great thing about cooking is that it's visual and it's practical. And so the teachers would both explain the theory and demonstrate dishes. And then it was just such fun cooking, and everything was from scratch. We didn't have any gadgets or machines. And so in the end, it was fine, and it was just great fun. Well, I suppose the Chinese take food very seriously. And one of the really striking things about Chinese cuisine, which I think is totally unrecognised really in the West, is that Chinese people really understand sort of diet as the basis of health. People are obsessed with healthy eating, and although sort of Chinese restaurant food in America has this reputation for being unhealthy, a bit junky, lots of deep fried things and salty sweet sauces, that Chinese home cooking is incredibly healthy. Lots of vegetables, and then in the south rice, in the north noodles and breads, and meat eaten in much smaller quantities than in the United States. And so I suppose that's one thing that has really influenced me. It's kind of using meat and fish as kind of for flavour and deliciousness, but not making them the centre of the meal. So, you can take a very tiny amount of pork or chicken and stir fry it with slivered vegetables. You've got a dish which is just as satisfying as like a whole chicken breast or whatever, but it's more healthy, more sustainable, more economical. So that's been one very big influence on me. Well, I think, in China, the Chinese for to eat a meal is 吃饭, which means to eat cooked rice. So rice is the centre of the meal, at least in the south of the country. And at its simplest, a Chinese meal can be just rice with some kind of relish to 下饭, to send the rice down. So, if you're a poor farmer, that might just be a few pickled vegetables, a bit of fermented tofu. And if you're rich, it might be lots of meat and fish. But rice is the sort of heart of the Chinese meal, at least in the south of the country. Over the last few years, I think that there's been a real shift in perceptions of Chinese cuisines in the West. You know, that old Cantonese model is being challenged by Sichuanese flavours from the northeast Dongbei region, lots of new regional flavours coming through. But I still think that we tend to underestimate Chinese cuisines, plural, because China really does have the most extraordinarily diverse culinary culture, and there are different styles of cooking. You know, going from the north to the south China is like being in another country. You know, every province has its own cuisine and specialities. There are different ethnic groups with their own speciality foods, and there are also, you know, Buddhist, vegetarian cooking, Muslim cooking, and I think this richness is not really sufficiently appreciated. So I would like to, I hope through my presentations, to just give people a little look at this sort of startling variety of Chinese food. There are so many fascinating and delicious aspects of Chinese cuisine that would translate very well for Western eaters. And so it's really hard to know where to begin. I mean, you just have to, you know, if you're interested in noodles, you can find incredible pasta and noodle dishes and, you know, all over the country. If you're interested in those kind of electrifying flavours, you know, the sort of you know, kimchi, pork belly, rich, sweet, sour, salty umami, then there's lots of that, you know, particularly in Sichuan, but in other regions too. So I think, yeah, that it could go in many different directions. I think I would advise any culinary student to just, you know, take Chinese food, Chinese cuisine very, very seriously. I mean, Chinese people just really know what they're doing when it comes to food. And of course there's bad Chinese food, there is junky Chinese food, but there's also incredibly sophisticated Chinese food. A lot of it's very healthy. And so I would just encourage people to be open-minded and just to bear in mind that what you normally see, you know, in America and Europe is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's really a lot more to discover.